We came from the beginning of the Nile, where God happy dwells at the foothills of the mountain of the moon.
What you see down here is the lake of fire. Now we're gonna get deep. You can go get the Book of the Dead, study it, but have look at it very weary because it's written by a white man. The lake of fire is representing the interior of Africa. There's a lot of volcanoes in that area, okay? And what happened is when these plates, Africa is on the plate, Arabia is on the plate, a tectonic plate. And these plates is up under there and they spin, okay? And a lot of time they come up and they grind, okay? And that causes earthquake. So Arabia pulled away from Africa. And when it did, a lot of that land down in the region of Egypt, lower parts of Sudan is sunk in. That's why it's called the Nile Valley. You understand what I'm saying? But up in this region is a lot of volcanoes. And in our spirituality and our ancient history, we remember when a lot of those volcanoes went off. And it caused us to migrate further down the river. Okay? And so this is the lake of fire. And what you're seeing right here, this is the lotus, which means rebirth. You can see the lotus up here. You can see the lotus up there. See what I'm saying? And when it's talking about the four heads, it's talking about these four sons of Horus, which represents north, south, east, and west. Now, this is brought to us by Dr. Ben, and Dr. Ben brought this to us from the papyrus of Hunefa, which is dated at 1306, 1290 BCE. It says this: we, meaning us, you and I, African people, came from the beginning of the Nile, where God happy dwell at the foothills of the mountain of the moon. Where is the foothills of the mountain of the moon? Number one, Mount Kilimanjaro in Kenya. Mount Rwenzori in Uganda. In the meta it's called Ta-Netaru, meaning land of the gods and goddesses. We coming right here, we're looking at Lake Tana in Ethiopia. That's the origin of the Blue Nile. You got two branches. You got the White Nile, you got the Blue Nile. The White Nile come out of Uganda, the Blue Nile come out of Lake Tana. They meet up at Khartoum, become one river, and flow down to the Mediterranean. So when it says we, from the papyrus of Hunefa, we came from the beginnings of the Nile, where God happy dwells at the foothills of the mountains of the moon. Mount Kilimanjaro, Mount Rwenzori. Mount Kilimanjaro, Mount Rwenzori.
As we go on, we can see that the place that they lived was at the interior of Africa, at the dead center portion of Africa, in fact on the equator, which they call Aker. Aker is where we get the word ek, which means equator or equal. And so this place, Osiris could sit here at Rwenzori, Kilimanjaro, the mountains of the moon as they call it, and peer over into the forest and watch the Twa do the dance of God. The pharaohs are in boats now, coming down the Nile in the boat. Their souls journeying back to come to rest in the land of reeds, the land of rushes, which is the great Sud region filled with papyrus plants and thickets. It is this Sud area that ships the papyrus and lotus to Egypt to give Egypt life every year. So the whole religion is a process that takes place in nature. They saw the inundation process. The Egyptians said the Nile River came from heaven. It's the clouds. You can see Kilimanjaro, Mount Kenya, towering above the clouds. The clouds are pouring water from heaven into the valley here, creating the large inundation, sending the alluvium and topsoil 4,100 miles from Egypt and 3,700 miles from Ethiopia, bringing life to Egypt. The whole process of the religion is here. So look at the geological processes that are responsible for the stories that you have. In the interior of Africa, I said that this black earth and silt came from the mountains, the volcanoes in the interior of Africa. They call this black burning rock Kim, and they showed it as a symbol, burning. It was in this area that the volcanoes would go off and create, you know, volcanoes create the richest soil in the world. Go to any island that's created by a volcano, you find all kinds of wildlife, vegetation. because it's the richest soil in the world. So this soil is created, and when the rain comes, it washes this diluvium down to Egypt, and you can see clearly Egypt was a barren land, and it gives life. So Ta Tenan, the raised land, the land of the ancestors, Ta Netherland, was a land where the soil was being shipped by the gods as a blessing to the Egyptians. I can't emphasize that enough, because we're going to come home to a point here. You can see here again the concept, the principle of the magma from the interior, from the underworld. You can see the clouds. As the clouds surround the mountain, this is where Osiris's throne was, where he could sit as the judge of the underworld. He's sitting in heaven, but yet he's on earth. They show you this in the drawings. He's on earth, but he's in heaven. He's at the place where the Nile is born, the place where the gods are born. This is the place where the souls have to tread on fire if they're found to be unjust. This is the legendary lake of fire that comes to us in Scripture and Bible. This is the place of the judgment seat. Victoria, which they call it, on Mwanza. This is the legendary lake of fire that they talked about. As you can see here, Atam, as they told the story, the primeval hill Ptah rose up, and Atam, fire rose and set on the hill, and the process of creation came about. So pyramid, you can find in the etymology of words, pyra means fire. Mid is the mound. The mound of fire is what the Greeks call the pyramid. Even though the Egyptians didn't call it that, it shows you that the Greeks understood the references that the Egyptians made to those structures. The mid, the mound of fire, the pyramid.
Now, in this science right here, you're going to see something very deep. Number one, this is the lake of fire. I ain't got a long time to teach this, because it's a deep story, and I can't tell you it all. But the lake of fire is the interior of Africa, right around the Great Lakes region, where there's a lot of volcanoes. And in early history, those volcanoes erupted, and the people had to migrate down the river. They had to come from up out of that region. And what you're seeing right here, this is the lotus. This is the lotus, which represents birth in ancient Kemet. And you see the four sons of Heru. And they also are symbolic of the canoptic jars, where they will place the liver, the organs, I think the heart, the kidney, and it's another organ that they put in there. But this represents north, south, east, and west. That they came up out of the interior of Africa, and they went out all over the world, north, south, east, and west. And if you look at the Nile, as it comes down, when you get down here, it takes the form of a lotus. And you can see that it came up out of the interior of Africa, and it got down, they came down the river. The river is flowing from south to north. It is flowing from the interior of Africa. It is flowing from the interior of Africa down to the Mediterranean. So you got to know that. So this is what symbolically what it means. They came out of the interior, right around the Great Lakes regions of Africa. They migrated down the river, and they went out north, south, east, and west.
We came from the beginning of the Nile, where God, happy, dwells at the foothills of the mountain of the moon.
The Nile. Draining over 3 million square kilometers of Africa, then flowing through one of the harshest deserts in the world, it's the world's longest river. This river was the powerhouse behind the world's first great civilization. Without the Nile's extraordinary fertility, there would be no Tutankhamun, no Cleopatra, no pyramids. It changed the world forever. Each year, the Nile performed a miracle. A great flood that brought not only water to the parched desert, but a staggering 140 million tons of fertile, volcanic soil. Somewhere far away, powerful forces gathered to swell the river and send it racing downstream. does the Nile's great flood really come from? And how is it able to perform its miracle? The river has been reluctant to give up its secrets. Now, we can unravel the mystery. The answer can only be found at the end of an extraordinary journey, far upstream into the remotest and strangest corners of Africa. It's an epic journey. This miraculous flood of water and silt was the powerhouse of the ancient Egyptian civilization. But there is an even greater miracle. Because here is a vast river that flows through 1,500 miles of scorching desert, yet never runs dry. What could be capable of generating this much water? When at last the source of the Nile was found, it provided the answer, but one that no one could have foreseen.
The vast expanse of the pale blue waters burst suddenly upon my gaze. I no longer felt any doubt that the lake at my feet gave birth to that river, the source of which had been the subject of so much speculation and the object of so many explorers.
Speke was convinced that here was the headwater that fed the Nile.
This lake's worthy of the Nile. On my inquiring about the lake's length, the man faced to the north and began nodding his head to it. At the same time, he kept throwing forward his hand to indicate something immeasurable, and added that nobody knew, but he thought it probably extended to the end of the world.
Speke could see this new lake was large, but he had no idea that it covered an area of 26,500 square miles. More like an inland sea, this is the largest lake in Africa. On the 28th of July, 1862, Speke reached the point where water flowed out of Lake Victoria as a boiling rapid.
The expedition had now performed its functions, and as I had foretold, the lake is the great source of the Holy River.
As far as Speke was concerned, this was the birthplace of the Nile, and he named it...
I claim this lake for England and the Crown, and I name her Victoria, after our gracious sovereign.
We came from the beginning of the Nile, where God, happy, dwells at the foothills of the mountain of the moon. We came from the beginning of the Nile, where God, happy, dwells at the foothills of the mountain of the moon.
It was clear to me now that there was a family of lakes and waterways that must feed the Nile. There was no single source. These lakes created one enormous reservoir system for the Nile. It's no wonder that it's such a great river.
Of course, there remained one final mystery. Where was the water coming from to fill all these lakes?
I saw a peculiar shaped cloud of a most beautiful silver colour, which assumed the proportions and appearance of a vast mountain covered with snow. it dawned on me that this must be the Ruwenzori. I had discovered the long-lost mountains of the moon.
The mountains of the moon, called for thousands of years, sit between the humid forests of the Congo Basin and the monsoon lands of East Africa. Ruwenzori, the local name, means rainmaker, and for much of the year they're shrouded in dense mist. No wonder so few white men had ever seen them. The altitude of the mountains attracts clouds from both east and west, and this steady supply of water trickles down on both sides of the range into Edward and Albert, and a third lake, George, feeding the headwaters of the Nile. The Ruwenzori's glaciers drip-feed the bogs, which, together with the forests, feed mountain streams, rivers, and the great African lakes. Frozen at some 16,500 feet above sea level, it is the Ruwenzori's glaciers that provide a steady supply for the lakes, that power the Nile on its 4,000-mile journey to Egypt. The water in Lake Victoria spilled north. The Nile was born. This new river found a route west to Lake Albert. From there, with a huge boost from the waters now pouring out of Lakes George, Edward, and Albert, the young Nile burst north. This vigorous river cut a route over hundreds of miles before entering the flatlands of Sudan. Here, within this vast marsh, the spirit of the river was tamed and steadied. It emerged into the northern deserts, strong and reliable. Finally, it was joined by its sister, the sediment-filled Blue Nile. The two Niles, now one, brought the gifts of water and nutrients into the desert of Egypt. The stage was set for the birth of a great civilization. It began just 7,000 years later.
We came from the beginning of the Nile, where God, happy, dwells at the foothills of the mountain of the moon.
So we know for a fact that what we call Egypt came up out of the heart of Africa. We, from the papyrus of Hunefa, we came from the beginnings of the Nile, where God happy dwells at the foothills of the mountains of the moon. Mount Kilimanjaro, Mount Renzori. Mount Kilimanjaro, Mount Renzori. We, from the papyrus of Hunefa, we came from the beginnings of the Nile, where God happy dwells at the foothills of the mountains of the moon. Mount Kilimanjaro, Mount Renzori. Mount Kilimanjaro, Mount Renzori. So we know for a fact that what we call Egypt came up out of the heart of Africa. So we know for a fact that what we call Egypt came up out of the heart of Africa. So we know for a fact that what we call Egypt came up out of the heart of Africa. From the papyrus of Hunefa, we came from the beginnings of the Nile, where God happy dwelled at the foothills of the mountains of the world. Mount Kilimanjaro, Mount Renzori. Mount Kilimanjaro, Mount Renzori. So we know for a fact that what we call Egypt came up out of the heart of Africa. For a fact that what we call Egypt came up out of the heart of Africa. So we know for a fact that what we call Egypt came up out of the heart of Africa. We, from the papyrus of Hunefa, we came from the beginnings of the Nile, where God happy dwelled at the foothills of the mountains of the world. Mount Kilimanjaro, Mount Renzori. Mount Kilimanjaro, Mount Renzori. we call Egypt came up out of the heart of Africa?
We came from the beginning of the Nile, where God happy dwells at the foothills of the mountain of the moon. Most people speak about Egypt as if Egypt was the first civilization or society in Egypt or in Africa, and that couldn't be more false than saying that a rabbit is a pigeon. Egypt is one of the last of the ancient cultures, if not the last along the Nile. What made Egypt so important is not that it led any African society in antiquity, but that it is the society in where most of the artifacts have remained, because it was the first of the African society and the societies of the entire world to place their recordings in stone. That's the uniqueness of Egypt in difference to other African societies along the Nile. We cannot place Egypt before the Sibyllian period, Sibyllian first, second, and third, in terms of records, whereas you can place the societies of Africa at the headwaters of the Nile: Ethiopia, Uganda, Somalia, even Kenya and Tanganyika. We go back to an Egyptian himself, and a very early Egyptian going back in the second and third dynasty, who said, we came, we meaning the Egyptians, from the beginning of the Nile, where God happy dwells, at the foothills of the mountain of the moon. In order to understand, we must go back to the paintings of the Grimaldis, the paintings of other small African people, namely the Hutu, and also the Kalahari, the Khoikhoi, and other Africans, especially those that went into Egypt, namely the Sebenetos. It must be now emphasized that Nubia is the mother of Egypt, just as Ethiopia is the mother of Nubia, and just as Somalia, Kenya, Uganda is the grandmother of Egypt. We came from the beginning of the Nile, where God happy dwells at the foothills of the mountain of the moon.
We want to deal with the fallopian tube of the Nile Valley. Without the fallopian tube of Africa, you wouldn't even have humanity on the planet Earth. When we deal with the birthplace of humanity, we have to deal with right there where they did their research on anthropology. You know, at one time, Europeans didn't consider Africa to be the home of man. They said Europe was the home of man, and then they said China was the home of man with the Java man. But only when they came into Africa, they found there is where we find the origin of humanity. With these little Africans named the Grimaltes who migrated up out of Africa recently, CNN, even though they only showed it one day, they recently excavated some fossil skulls of 2 adults and 1 child discovered in the far region of eastern Ethiopia, have been dated at 160,000 years, making them the oldest known fossils of modern humans and Homo sapiens sapiens. And then when they reconstructed this fossil, they only showed it one day. When they reconstructed it, this is what he looked like. Here we see our brothers right here. Adultu, who means the elder. So long before the Adam and Eve story that they're trying to put Adam and Steve on you today, African people were the first people on the planet Earth. Going back thousands upon thousands of years, they don't know your birth record. These maps of the Omo Valley region, the oldest modern humans, 195,000 years old, coming up out of this region, as I said, migrating around the world from the early documentation that we see here today.
Great Lakes region of Africa is the home of all humanity. This is where humankind began. We slowly come down the Nile, spending 9/10 of all of humanity's lifetime in Africa. This map shows how we walked up out of the Great Lakes region into the other regions of the world, such as Asia and Europe.
We came from the beginning of the Nile, where God happy dwells at the foothills of the mountain of the moon.
We have the continent that one of the most ancient names go back to Akibalan, as also the Grecian society, look as Nigritia. And it is here that our African ancestors from the Great Lakes regions of Africa, as I do in this presentation and civilization, showing where our ancestors migrated down to 4,100 miles of the Nile, where civilization came down the Nile, where our ancestors migrated. It did not come from Mesopotamia into Africa. It came from the heart, because our ancestors said that on the Papyrus of Hunefer, we clearly stated that we came from the beginning of the Nile, where God happy dwelt at the foothill of the mountain of the moon, that being Kilimanjaro and Rwenzori. And it is here we reach the zenith of civilization in the land of Kemet that they call Egypt today. But this is also the land that's spoke of in the Bible, in the land of Ethiopia, also known as Cush, ancient names also known as Kish, that a river that we returned back there in 83 and 84, that a river compasses the whole land of Ethiopia as it speaks of in the Bible, coming from Lake Tana. And here, so we can clearly understand the land of Ethiopia, I have here from the Webster's Dictionary, clearly showing Ethiopia, where it clearly says an ancient country in northeastern Africa. And it's interesting, right above Ethiopia it has ethics, the science of man's morals and duties and principles. But we go on to see why I put Webster in there, because in Genesis chapter 2 it clearly told us that, and the name of the second river is Gilhon, the same as it that compasses the whole land of Ethiopia. This is where the Garden of Eden was. Why is it that we could not see Africa in the Bible, the country of Ethiopia? Because we were systematically taught to hate Africa, so we could not see Ethiopia. In fact, even though it says Ethiopia, and it doesn't speak of the Tigris and Euphrates River until the 3rd and 4th river, but it goes on to say to the 15th verse that Lord God made man and put man into the garden.
Now, what Genesis did, what the Hebrews did, is they plagiarized from our teachers. In Genesis 2:10, it says this, and the river went out of Eden to water the garden, and this it was parted and became unto 4 heads. Let me show you what they're trying to steal from. Now, what you see right here to the right is the resurrected Messiah, the God, the Lord of the perfect black, God Asa, who was murdered by his brother Set Typhon, and he resurrected to sit upon the throne of judgment in Amenta, which is the afterlife. Now, if you look at the bottom, you will see the zigzag lines in the oblong rectangle at the bottom with his feet on top of it. That represents the lake of fire. That represents the volcanic region of Central East Africa. And what happened is, early on in our history, those volcanoes went off, and it causes our people to migrate up out of that region. So what you see right here is the lotus. The lotus in ancient Egypt represents birth, resurrection. And you also see the 2 fallopian tubes on the side of the lotus. And then at the top, you see the 4 sons of Heru, the 4 sons of Horus. Now, if you look at the Nile River, you can see it coming up out of Central East Africa. You see it coming up out of the Great Lakes region. And when it gets down to the Mediterranean, it looks like it takes the form of a lotus. But let me show you. That's what it is. And said, so we're going to go back. And a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and thence it was parted and became unto 4 heads. These are the heads. These are the 4 heads. It shows that each one, east, west, north, and south, it represents that our people came up out of Central East Africa, and they come down the river, and they went out east, west, north, and south to populate the globe as we know it today. In Genesis 2:12, this is what it says. And the name of the first is dealing with the rivers that come up out of Eden. The name of the word, the first, is Pison. That is it which conquers the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold. Let me show you the map. If you look down there at number 1, that's Havilah. And then number 2, if you read in the Bible, was Cush, Ethiopia. It says Ethiopia. The original, the King James say Ethiopia. Now they're trying to say Cush. Because, see, our babies, they ain't gonna know Cush. We might know it because we do the studies. Ethiopia, as soon as you say Ethiopia, a baby can go to the map. They know where Ethiopia is. That's too easy. So now they want to say Cush. And then it goes, number 3 is Assyria, and the 4th was Shinar. And a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from thence it was parted and became unto 4 heads. The name of the first is Pison, that is which compassed the whole land of Havilah, or Havilah, where there is gold. I'm going to go down. And the gold of that land is good. There's bdellium and the onyx stone. And the name of the second river is Gihon. The same is that compasseth the whole land of Ethiopia. This is the Garden of Eden. And then it goes on to say, and the name of the third river, Hiddekel, that is which goeth towards the east of Assyria, and the 4th river is the Euphrates. So a lot of people say it came out of Mesopotamia. But according to Genesis, it came out of Africa first, and then it went into Mesopotamia. It came up out of Africa. So Cush is Ethiopia, Mizraim is Egypt. You got Havilah over here, and if you go to Genesis 10, verse 7, and it says, the sons of Cush, Seba, and Havilah. So this shows that Havilah is the son of Ethiopia. It's the son of Ethiopia. So all of this was African. This is what started this. Now this is according to the Bible. But from the knowledge that we have studied up under our elder scholars, man, listen here, the Egyptians had taken over all of this shit. None of this even exists. This is just according to the Bible. This is biblical mythology. There's some truth in it, but you got to understand it by understanding your original knowledge. And then you can look at this and say, okay, I see where they're coming from. And so we're going to be looking at a lot of various maps today. And I'm going to be going through a lot of geography that's in reference to Africa, African people, and our political system. Now what we're looking right here, you're looking at Africa. You're looking at Africa, and these are the different types of terrain, the different type of environmental terrains in Africa. As right here you can see, this is desert. This is all this region up here. Okay? This region up in here is savanna. But you see right in here, this is the green area. This is the lush rainforest of Africa. This is the lush area. And so when you look in that prime spot, this is it right here. This is what, and you see the Great Lakes region right in here. This is what the Egyptians call the Ta-Nehru, the land of the gods. And so this is the lush regions right here. So now we look. Now you got to understand, when you're dealing with that rainforest, medicine, herbs, vegetation beyond your wildest imagination. We can eat, we can drink, and we ain't gotta ask no motherfucker for nothing. See, that's where we stand alone now. You understand what I'm saying? We can eat, we can drink, and you know the animals is gonna flock in this region too, because they can do the same thing. So the abundance of life in this area is unlike any other place on the planet Earth. The only other place that might have somewhat this type of environment is South America. You can see, you can come from, you got the Nile flowing from south to north. It's flowing from this direction down to the Mediterranean. And then you got the Congo flowing from east to west, and the mouth empties right there. And so any type of Atlantic trade on the other side of the Atlantic, you can do that. You understand what I'm saying? You can bring it here, you can transfer. All of this is freshwater fish. So you can bring fish from this region down into this region. You can bring fish from this region over into this region. Again, you see up in here, which they call south of the Sahara. But south of the Sahara is the richest real estate on the planet Earth. You need to go in there and you need to study them countries in that area. But all countries. But primarily this is where our peoples is located. Most of the blacks in Africa have been pushed below the Sahara. And so this is where the majority of our peoples is down in these regions.
And so you look here and you look at all of the precious minerals that's in Africa. That's how you see when you go down in our kings and our queens tombs that we have so much gold and precious minerals in our tombs. That's why we like it today. It's something that's always been in our blood. And you see right here all of the fruits and vegetables and all the vegetation and grains that's coming up out of Africa, going straight to Europe, going straight to the white man here in America, killing all the food, putting these goddamn commercials on Africa, showing African people starving. Why they starving? Because y'all shipping all the wealth and all of the food in Europe, in America. See, and then come get your money off a goddamn infomercial. Talking about save the babies. Yeah. So they getting paid all ways.
So, now you see this backdrop. I had to bring this backdrop out because we are quick to call another man's land holy. We're quick to call Israel holy. Mecca holy. All these other lands holy. But as I showed you that fresh water, as I showed you that rainforest, now I'm going to show you animal life. Not only did humanity begin in Africa, all animal life began in Africa. And so, like I said, if you want a burger, you can have a burger. Huh? You want a giraffe burger? We can have one.
And y'all need to see that right there. When you talking about Asia, you can tell that Africa was the true source of all things, because when the African animals went into Asia, they digressed. Look at the goddamn lion, look at the goddamn elephants. They didn't have the same damn vegetation and food and water and all the things in Africa that they had. So when they went into damn Asia, they digressed. Look at it. Showing that Africa was the source of the dominant gene.
Motherfucker talking about Israel is the land of milk and honey. Nigga, Israel is a goddamn desert. Check the imports and exports, okay? See, that cuts all the bullshit out. So you can see the only thing, the reason why they want you to look to Israel, they want you to look to Mecca. Mecca is another desert, okay? And so you will not look to the most richest real estate on the planet Earth, which is Africa. If you can prove me wrong, I'll be here next Friday. Bring all your goddamn facts and bring them, and you better have them all. And I'll guarantee you I will refute you and send your ass on your way, and your feelings might be hurt, but at least you'll have the truth. Ain't no way you can go to any other land and see that kind of life. No way. No way. Just tens of thousands of species. You got to understand what Africa is. Most people don't even understand what Africa is. So we know for a fact that what we call Egypt came up out of the heart of Africa.
The Egyptian writer Hunefer, Hunefer, in the papyrus of Hunefer said, quote, "We came from the beginning of the Nile, where God happy dwells at the foothills of the mountain of the moon."